It is a little after 9:30. I'm Rob Johnson from the City of Seattle, Chair of the Transportation Policy Board. Welcome to our regularly scheduled Thursday, July 12th, 2018 meeting. Let's start by going around the table and doing self-introductions. We'll start with the Vice Chair.
Becky Erickson, Mayor, City of Paulsbo, representing Kitsap Transit.
I'm Ron Lucas, the Mayor of Stillicum, and I represent Pierce County, other cities and towns.
I am Mike Kortz, the Mayor of DuPont, and I am Ron's alternate. He told me we were going to a Mariners game, and so I was surprised when we walked into this building.
Paul Roberts, City Council Member Everett, and also wearing the Clean Air Agency hat. Thanks.
Mike Todd, Councilmember of City of Mill Creek, representing Community Transit.
Ryan Calkins, Port of Seattle Commissioner, representing the ports of Everett, Seattle, Tacoma, and Bremerton.
Jan Ray with AAA Washington, representing business.
Jesse Hamashima, Pierce County staff, representing the Regional Staff Committee.
Kate Kruller, City of Tukwila Council. I am representing 38 cities from Sound Cities Association.
Jennifer Robertson, Bellevue City Council, representing City of Bellevue.
Dana Ralph, Mayor of Kent, representing other cities and towns in King County.
Davina Dura, Deputy Mayor of Bothell, representing Sound Cities Association.
Kelly McGurdy, PSRC staff.
Chris Beal, representing Tacoma.
Dave, can you give him your microphone at least for a minute while Chris gets set up and learns the new process?
Good morning, Dave Ramsey with the Transportation Improvement Board.
Trinity Parker, Sound Transit, representing Transportation Operators Committee.
Rob Berman from HDR Engineering, representing the Seattle Chamber.
John Winans, Washington State Department of Transportation.
Beck Ashby, Port Orchard City Council, representing other cities, Kitsap.
Good morning, Kevin Gorman, representing the City of Bremerton, council member.
We've got a couple of folks on the line. Councilmember Deb Nelson, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Good morning. Councilmember John Clausen, are you on the line?
Yes, sir.
Good morning. Councilmember Ryan Mello.
I'm here and I represent Pierce Transit here. Thank you.
Good morning. Anybody else on the line that I missed? Okay. We've got a couple of new members today, as is per our usual process. I wanted to give them a chance to sing a few bars about the joys of transportation or what brought them here. You don't have to take me up on that if you don't want to, but welcome. We'll start with you, Mayor Counts, and then we'll go to you to Commissioner Calkins, and then you, Councilmember Beal. 3 new members. If you'd like to take a few moments, you're more than welcome to.
Sure, thank you very much. Yes, as I said, I represent the City of DuPont. You can find us between exits 118 and 119 on I-5. John and I have spent a lot of time recently, and you may know us from our experience with Amtrak last December. That's probably where most people have heard of DuPont. But otherwise, we like to tell people that we're the crown jewel of the South Sound and the first non-native settlement on Puget Sound.
And I'm Ryan Calkins. I'm a newly elected Port Commissioner at the Port of Seattle. And the things that I'd want to emphasize, you told me 15 minutes or so, and then so 3 things that at this table I get to represent all 4 ports, and I'm going to actively reach out to the ports of Everett and Bremerton to get their feedback on the issues that matter to them most. I also am a managing member of the Northwest Seaport Alliance, which is the structure between the ports of Seattle and Tacoma to handle container cargo and other cargo operations. And so I'm going to bring those voices to the table. And I also, of course, represent SeaTac Airport, which moves a ton of people. We are the 9th largest airport in the country. We're currently about 50 million passengers, 70% of which are origin and destination passengers. We are not an airport that pushes most people through like a hub, like Atlanta or Denver. We really need to get people to and from. And so this gives me an opportunity to be a part of that conversation around how we get people to and from that critical node. So thank you all for this group, and I look forward to participating.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. My name is Chris Beal. I'm a representative from the city of Tacoma. I'm a newly elected city official, replacing Robert Toms while he is in Afghanistan on leave. So I may or may not be here for a few months, and then we'll see what happens when Councilmember Toms gets back. I represent the south end of Tacoma, and this is my first time being an elected official. Obviously, we have a lot going on in Tacoma, plans for bus rapid transit, light rail extension, a number of different transportation projects going on, and a lot of growth. So I'm happy to be here, happy to represent Tacoma at the regional level, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. I also regret to inform the body that we will have one departure. This is the last meeting for you, Janet Ray. Congratulations on your retirement. But you know, you've been with this body for a little more than 8 years now, serving on a whole lot of different subcommittees as well as a regular attendee here. And we're just really incredibly grateful to you for the time and energy that you've spent here. Janet Cook, who I understand will become our new member, has some very large shoes to fill. You've been really great. In particular, I remember several of the prioritization processes that you've sat on. Having a very steady voice in those has been very helpful to us as a body and as a region. So any final thoughts of wisdom that you would like to share with us on your departure?
So, well, I shared with my staff when I announced my retirement. I've worked for AAA for 44 years, so that's a pretty long stint. And I indicated, you know, I listened to my mentor, Yogi Berra, who said, you know, when you come to a fork in the road, you take it. And so I've decided that fork has come. My husband and I are selling our home in the Mill Creek area and moving to Mason Lake, which is Mason County, so very different climb than here. But I will certainly still, even though on the fringes of the regional council's territory, be fascinated to see what happens. It's been a privilege for me to be able to work, and I look at the faces around this table of the hard workers, the great intent, and I know that we're going to be successful. We just have to keep moving forward. And so I guess my charge to you is don't look in the rearview mirror, look ahead, and let's make sure that our region continues to be the fantastic one that we know it is. So thank you.
Please join me in saying a big thank you to you, Ms. Ray. So that is the extent of my remarks for this morning. Let's move on to agenda item number 3, communications and public comment. We've got a couple of people. Alex Zimmerman, you're our... Mr. Zimmerman. This is your time, Mr. Zimmerman. We invite you up to give public comment. Your 2 minutes are about to begin.
Thank you very much. Why are these people second class? Who you are? Why you never introduce these people?
Please start the clock. Mr. Zimmerman is clearly addressing the board.
Okay, don't worry. I see you every day. Heil, my dirty double-A Führer, a Nazi social democratic mafia with progressive Gestapo principle. Guys, forgive me. You don't give me chance use by legal a word what is you thinking is not polite. But last week, Snohomish, Executive Summers don't give me chance speak in sound transit. Why? It's violation of law, constitution, and city code. Seattle. Same happened with your chair, Johnson. He always stopping me. And he extremely not popular right now in Seattle. 80% people against him. It's a huge difference. You make him a chair. Why? Because he very close friend to crook Don Constantine. Guys, what is you did with sound transit is so unique. You make from 7 million Washingtonian what is I call we make American chocolate to Russian shit. Pardon for my French, but it's exactly what is you did. $100 billion Ponzi scheme will reflect all 7 million Washingtonian. We all pay for this. It's number one. Number two, Tacoma, Pierce County, rejects this. You're supposed to be bring class action against sound transit for stealing money. We have one class action right now, but it's a constitutional class action. I talk about this in Tacoma. I talk about in Pierce County Council. These people present here and nobody doing nothing. It's what is crook you are. And I told you many times, you all freaking criminal. You're more dangerous than Nazis and communists because you're acting like an idiot, destroying best country in the world, what is I know. And believe me, I'm enough educated. So stand up, American. Clean this dirty chamber from these crooks.
Ms. Richard, you're next.
Come on, second-class citizen.
Yes, that's not a fair statement, but anyway, I'm Miss Richard, and I have been away for a while because I've been away for a while. But I'm still here, that's what they tell me. So anyway, the situation that I'm having right now is that I use the bus for transportation, and I got on and I noticed that the fare enforcers kind of doubled up on the bus, and I was told that that's not supposed to happen. In other words, one enforcer said, well, they were supposed to be on the E line. What were they doing on the D line? And I said, look, I don't know. And so I reported to Mike O'Brien, because he deals with transportation too, and we have all of you people here dealing with transportation. Then I see other unusual things where they really kind of bring people down to the lowest decimal because they don't have $2.75. And those are egregious circumstances for me to have to witness, because I was born and raised in Seattle, came up around the time when they use little tokens to put in the little thing, drop it in, 20 cents to ride the bus. And now folk is going to jail for not paying $2.75. So you must be some type of neo-Nazi Gestapo order if you're abusing the general public to that extent. Even with myself having to flash my pass twice on a bus where I already paid to get on, and then you're going to sit up there and maliciously harass people, can't mind their own business, while you jumping on and off the bus, intimidating them. So I'm sure there'll be more, right? See you next time.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. Mr. Locke, you're the final person who signed up to give public comment. We're bringing a microphone to you, Mr. Locke.
I think something with my mic. Okay. I'm Paul W. Locke. Item 7 on this agenda. I understand the transit agencies are over budget in expenditures for operations. The automated rail system is like they use in Japan should be the one you're using. No operators. The money coming from the federal government. I sent Trump $505. He promised us that he would send to Congress a budget. This is cash flow. I hope he succeeds. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Locke. That concludes the folks who've signed up to give public comment. We'll move on to Kelly McGurty for our staff report. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning. I'll be brief. I just wanted to let you folks know that as part of being a large urbanized area, we are required every 4 years to go through a certification review by our federal partners. And in the past, this has been a 2.5-day, fairly lengthy process followed by a report. But this year, we met with them on Tuesday, and it was a short day-long meeting, and we had a great conversation. They're very happy with the work that we're doing here. So we wanted to share that with you. They have asked for a few moments of your time at your September or October meeting so they can come and provide feedback, and then we expect to have the report in September as well, and we'll also share that with you. But it was a really positive meeting. We got great feedback, and more to come soon. And that's all I have this morning. Thank you.
Any questions? I'm not seeing any. Thanks, Kelly, for that great report. Consent agenda, agenda item number 5. There are 4 items on the consent agenda. Does any member wish to remove an item from the consent agenda? Seeing nobody raising their hand, does anyone want to make the motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Beck. I appreciate your attentiveness this morning. It always takes a brave volunteer to get us started. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great. Consent agenda is adopted. Let's move on to you, Kelly, for agenda item number 6 and talk about our FTA contingency list.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. This is something that we bring in front of the board every year for our Federal Transit Administration funds. As you know, when we go through project selection, we program funds in advance to projects based on estimates. And for many years, the Federal Transit Administration has had a requirement that when we get our final allocations each federal fiscal year, we make that adjustment to projects. So the body of work in front of you in agenda item 6 is our 2018 dollars. It was, I think, less than 2 months ago that we received the final 2018 federal allocations. These projects had originally been awarded by you during our last project selection process. And so now we have about 38, just under 39 million additional Federal Transit Administration dollars to make these adjustments. You can see on the attachment A that the high-level summary by agency, and attachment B has the lengthy list of projects. These are all of the transit agency projects receiving 2018 dollars. There is a column second from the right for the actual recommended adjustment. You'll see that 3 of our agencies have some small-scale adjustments, and again, this is just reflecting we estimated a little bit higher of the earnings from those agencies based on the final allocations. One final note I would make is, again, as you're aware and as we're going to talk about for the next agenda item, our Federal Transit Administration funds come to the region in 2 ways. The majority of the funds come to us based on the actual service that our transit agencies are providing, and we've had a policy recommended by this board to do an earn share distribution, so that's why you'll see a lot of projects going back to those transit agencies. There is a smaller portion within our Seattle, Tacoma, Everett area. The funds are earned in the region based on regional attributes. Those are the dollars that we set aside for a regional competition, and as with other processes, we do have a contingency list, and so the amount of additional funds from that portion of the calculation from the FTA funds is going to the adopted Federal Transit Administration contingency list. 2 other details in this relatively routine process is, one, there are 3 projects that are new to us, so they are new projects that you have not seen in front of you before, and per our policy, we do take those projects out for public comment, so they are out now. It's a Kitsap Transit project on the 2 Skagit Transit projects, not new necessarily to the transit agencies, but new to this body and our work. So those are out for public comment. We have received 1 thus far that was supportive of the funds going to those projects. And then my last note is that there is 1 project in King County that has not yet been identified for the funds that they have earned. And one of the details here is that it's the Federal Transit Administration funds come in 4 types. And one of them in particular is pretty precise in terms of eligibility, so the county is still going through their budget process to determine where those funds might be appropriately placed. And when they do have those decisions made, we will come back to this body. So in sum, we have 38 million additional dollars for 2018 transit funds, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Questions, folks? Earn share distribution stuff is pretty self-explanatory. We've been doing this for a really long time, but happy to entertain questions. I'm not seeing anybody jump to a microphone, so this is an action that does require approval. Please, Councilmember Todd.
Happy to make a motion to recommend approval of the 2018 adjustment of PSRC's Federal Transit Administration funds and distribution of funds to the FTA Regional Contingency List of projects.
Second.
Well said, both of you. Thank you very much. Any further discussion, folks? Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. 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 Any opposed? Great. Thank you very much, Kelly. On to you, Kelly, for agenda item number 7.
All right. So that's kind of, I was describing this morning, we go through project selection, which is phase 1. The adjustments and the contingency fundings are kind of phase 2. So now we're circling back around to phase 1. As you all know, we have been hard at work doing project selection for our next round of funding. And since there could be some new folks in the room, I'll spend just a short amount of time providing some of the background. We do project selection. Again, we program in advance. We do this every 2 years. And prior to launching the process, we ask for volunteers from this body as well as our other boards to serve on a project selection task force. We've had, in the past several cycles, we've had 30-plus volunteers, so there's a lot of interest in serving in the task force, and we really appreciate the level of detail, and we get down into the weeds, and the task force recommends what we call the policy framework, and this really guides how we do project selection and how the projects that you're seeing today that are recommended for funding, how we get to that point. So the task force met 4 times in 2017 and walked through all of the policies and procedures and details and set-asides that wove its way into the policy framework, which was adopted in February of this year. We immediately turned around and released the call for projects. And PSRC staff and all of the staff around the region have been hard at work going through the policy framework, applying the criteria, and preparing the recommendations that we're going to walk through today. So a little more background, we receive about $260 million on an annual basis from federal transportation dollars. The majority of that just based on how the federal funds are managed in the state of Washington. We've talked a little bit already about the Federal Transit Administration funds. They really are very closely tied, to the services being provided by the transit agencies. Our Federal Highway Administration funds, we manage a smaller amount of those in total compared to the FTA funds, but that's in large part due to how the state of Washington, how those federal highway funds flow through. So as we mentioned, we program in advance, and this process we are distributing a little further out than we've done in the past. We're looking at 2021 and 2022 dollars. So this is a busy chart, but essentially this is to share that there's about $530 million, give or take, that we are distributing as part of this process, and we run 4 concurrent processes. We set aside a portion of the highway funds for a regional competition. That's turned out to be about $52 million for this process. We also take about half of the dollars and we distribute them among our 4 countywide groups for countywide competitions. These are still based on the policy framework, but they're designed so that each countywide can apply them to more local priorities. All told, that's about $105 million. This does include the 2 set-asides of the bicycle, pedestrian, and preservation set-aside. There's a few other distributions. We do, per your recommendation, have a small amount from each pot for PSRC's work program moving forward. And then we will be conducting a Rural Town Centers and Corridors program. It's $5 million. That was an increase this cycle. And we'll be conducting that process for our rural towns and cities next year. On the transit side, you can see, as I mentioned, very similar to the adjustments process that you just took action on. The majority of that is what we call our earned share distribution. It's based on the service that's actually being provided. And then we do set a small amount aside for a regional competition for this cycle. That was $24 million. The other thing I would note, which is embedded in this chart, is all of our processes, the policy focus for our competitions remains support for centers and the corridors that serve them. They are broadly defined for the 3 of these 4 concurrent processes to include both regional and local centers. The Federal Highway Administration regional competition is the sole component where it's solely focused on supporting the regional designated centers. This is one of my favorite charts to show. We have about $530 million, but we had about $870 million of requests. This is not new. This is pretty standard for what we receive, and you can see a little bit of the breakdown in terms of each process. But we had 254 projects submitted across the board for all of our concurrent processes. There's about 124 of those being recommended. And the other thing I might add is just that we do a very rigorous review of every project. We make sure that these projects are not only consistent with regional plans, but coming from your local plans as well and consistent with those plans. We make sure that they have done an eligibility check of all the federal funding source. So it is quite a lengthy and rigorous process. Everyone's just a little bit tired after we get through this. So one of the things that we've been working hard to do is you've got lists of projects, very long lists of projects in your packet, but we're trying to paint the story a little bit. So we're taking a little time today just trying to do that. I mentioned that there's about 124 projects that are being recommended among those 4 processes. And we took a stab at identifying the major project types, which you can see on this chart. The blue bar represents the percentage of the amount of funding available. The orange chart is the number of projects. The one thing I would caveat is this is rather a difficult chart for us to create because projects just don't align themselves with one category. They really do multiple things. So we continue to work on that. But I think one note I might make from this is This does include that large amount of FTA funds as well in terms of the earned share, and a lot of those dollars are spent to basic preservation, maintenance, operational activities. So the overall flavor of the PSRC funds for preservation and equipment, those two by far represent the majority. The other thing I would note, and this is a little draft, so we will pin this down, but we have a slightly different mix of projects. We usually have a fair balance among phases, but this time around, over 80% of the recommended projects are getting themselves through to construction or some other implementation. Usually I think that that's a little bit more balanced, but projects were in the queue and ready to be implemented, so that's pretty exciting to note. So this chart we include because we often get questions. So as you remember, there is a bicycle pedestrian set aside for our highway funds. It's set at 10% of the total. But as I mentioned earlier, and those set aside dollars tend to go to projects that are solely providing bicycle pedestrian infrastructure. But what isn't kind of shown in the flavor of that previous chart is how many other projects are including these other elements. And we're not able to parse out the dollars because that one project might be paving a lane, adding transit shelters, adding a sidewalk, doing a lot of things. So it's kind of one bulk piece of project. But we do think it's important to point out that we are doing certainly more than just the 10%. Our projects really are being submitted as multimodal investments. So we wanted to dig in a little. And so you see the 10% set aside bar on the left, but we looked at all of the other projects, and really you can see 25% of the projects are including, of the other projects are also including sidewalks, 21% are including bicycle lanes or cycle tracks. We only have 3% that are actually looking at separated pathways because a lot of folks are now really focusing on that access to transit within the urbanized areas. 25% are improving and updating their ADA curb ramps. And then the other category are things like bike racks on buses and bike shares and pedestrian signalization. So the 10% non-motorized set aside under the FHWA program is actually translating into 13% of our total highway funds. But really over 90% of our remaining projects are including some additional non-motorized element within their scope. So that's a point that we continue to try to make. It's a little challenging to do it via these graphics, but we wanted to make sure that we share that message. The other thing that we're trying to do, again, in terms of painting the picture of these funds and the projects that are being implemented and implementing our plans, we wanted to take a look, and these were things that we specifically took note of from the projects that we were seeing in the competitions. Many of them really are, now that the long-range plan is adopted, they really are actively implementing improvements to freight, getting ready for that new transit service. So we just somewhat unscientifically looked at our mapping of all the projects, and once we get to the next stage in the process, we will have all of the projects mapped and you'll be able to look at all the details. But we wanted to take a look at, of those capital projects, and again, not the bus purchases, not the equipment, but of the capital projects, 61 of them are on a facility that has a transit route. So that could be an actual transit improvement. It could be repaving that facility, which would also be helpful to transit. 61 projects are also on a designated freight route. Freight is a project category similar to safety. There are all sorts of variations of what a freight project might be, and we'll talk a little bit about a few of those. But 61 of those projects are also on a freight route, and again, that could be repaving. It could be actual providing improvements into one of our ports or one of our manufacturing industrial centers. It could be separation of modes. And then the other thing to note is I mentioned the FHWA regional competition is the sole competition where the eligibility is supporting our regional centers. All of the other competitions can include local centers. But looking at where the projects are, either projects that are located within our regional centers, both growth and manufacturing industrial, or somehow supporting and leading into those centers, 66% of our regional centers are being supported by the projects that you see in front of you, in addition to the local centers. So we would be, if you have particular ideas of other things that you would like to see as we move forward, we would be happy to take a look at that. The other thing we wanted to mention, and we're going to queue up our partners at the Transportation Improvement Board, who I think just joined us, and you'll be hearing from them a little bit later. We wanted to talk about funding partnerships. We've received some questions on how projects are getting themselves funded, and we have quite a spread of small projects that maybe they're $250,000 to large projects that are $1 billion and up. So the first bullet is a little bit shocking, but while we have a hotly competitive process here at PSRC for our federal dollars, we really only represent about 3% of the total annual transportation expenditures going on in the state of Washington. And that, of course, includes the Sound Transit Program, the Connecting Washington Program, all of the state and local investments. So we realize, I think one of the lessons from that bullet is that we can't fund everything. So we wanted to take a look at what does the funding package look like. We know that there's some projects do get fully constructed just with PSRC's federal funds and local funds, but many projects look for a variety of sources. So high level, looking at our highway funds in particular, there are 7 of the projects on the recommended list that have current or future Transportation Improvement Board funds, and I know Ashley and Greg will be talking about that in a moment. 5 projects have funds from the Connecting Washington package that are also now being recommended for our $21 and $22. And then we know at least 4 of the transit projects are relying on additional federal discretionary funding. So again, it's a mix of small projects, large projects. Everyone is always looking for that full funding package. So what I'd like to do now, so the attachments in Agenda Item 7, there's 4 attachments. They're very lengthy. The first one is the recommendations from the Regional Highway Competition. Each of the processes has a recommended contingency list as well. So we have a limited amount of funding. Projects are recommended to that amount. And then we have prioritized projects in the wings should additional funds become available. The second attachment are the 4 countywide processes. And again, there's the recommendations followed by contingency list. The third attachment is our regional FTA competition, and then the fourth is the majority of the dollars, which are the FTA earned share and preservation set aside. There's a lot of information in there. I mentioned we are working on creating a web map so that you'll be able to view in, see a project, click on it, and see more information. But I wanted to just give you a few highlights. The first one is the Port of Tacoma SR 509 spur. This is part of the overall Gateway program. And pardon me while I pull up my notes. It is recommended for $4 million for construction from the Regional Highway Competition. It'll include a new 4-lane limited access connection from I-5 to the Port of Tacoma Manufacturing Industrial Center. It includes restoration of Ilabos Creek, riparian zone, as well as a connection to the interurban trail in Fife. And I would note that one of the things that you'll see from specifically from the Regional Highway Competition is that there are several pretty large-scale freight projects in the mix this time. They did very well in the competition, and we're seeing them through to construction. Looking more on the county-wide side, the city of Poulsbo is recommended for the SR 305 pedestrian tunnel. It's recommending for $1.35 million for construction from the Kitsap Countywide competition. And this will construct a shared use path tunnel under State Route 305 at a quite congested intersection, also connecting to 4 different trails. Federal Way is being recommended for the 3rd phase of their adaptive traffic control system. They're recommended for a modest amount for design, $170,000 from the King Countywide competition. And this will upgrade communications and install camera to support their adaptive traffic control system for 13 additional intersections. And you can see, probably not very well, but phases 1, 2, and 3 there at the top. Another example from the Snohomish Countywide competition is Mount Lake Terrace's Main Street revitalization. This is phase 2 of that project. They are recommended for $2 million for construction. And this is going to improve 2 roadways within their town center, which includes reconstruction of the roadways, sidewalks and bicycle lanes, curb ramps, lighting, and signal upgrades. So again, that's kind of a really good example of that flavor of trying to pinpoint one project type for a project that's doing so many things. We tend to call that multimodal, which certainly is multimodal, but that doesn't paint quite as robust a picture when you see the actual scope. This is another, in addition to the freight projects which we mentioned were highly successful in the highway competition, both in the highway and the transit competition, it was a bit remarkable to see, I believe we have 6 or 7 bus rapid transit projects that are recommended for funding. All told, it's a combined total of $43 million, just under $43 million from the highway regional competition, some of the countyway competitions, as well as the transit competition. King County Metro's Rapid Ride from Totem Lake down to Overlake, Pierce Transit's Pacific Avenue State Route 7 corridor, Community Transit Swift Orange Line, Sound Transit's I-405 Bus Rapid Transit, and Seattle's Rapid Ride for Madison and Rainier. And the thing to note here, again, this is key implementation of the plan that was just adopted, and all of these transit agencies are working together to support that vision. So those were just a few examples of many projects in your agenda packet that are being recommended. Where we are right now, we are bringing you the project recommendations today. The executive board will see them at their meeting later this month. Once you recommend those projects, we will go forth and prepare our new transportation improvement program, which will be the 2019 to 2022 TIP. We will ask you to release that body of work for public comment, and that TIP will include all of these project recommendations, all of the other projects we know about within that 4-year time span. We'll do some mapping, we'll do our equity analysis, we'll do our conformity analysis, so it's another body of work that we'll get through. And then we will bring you back the public comments in October and ask you to adopt that new TIP, and then we will move forward through the process. So this is the action. We're asking for recommended approval of the projects in Agenda Item 7, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
This group's generally not shy about interrupting you when they have questions, Kelly, but I'll take a pause here. Yes, please, Councilmember Roberts.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Kelly, thanks for the presentation. I have just one quick comment, and that is that as you went to that first bullet and showed that there was a relatively small percentage of the overall construction and project dollars represented in this work. I appreciate that, but it understates, and I know you probably intended it to in a way, understates the breadth and depth of the kinds of projects, and as you showed the projects, it really underscored that there is a region that we're trying to bring transportation services to, and that this work covers a whole lot of this region. And it's impressive. And if you can get that much bang for 3 and 4%, just think what we could do if we had 10%. So I just want to compliment all who've been involved in this, because I think it really is an impressive list. And I'm prepared to make a motion, but I'm not sure we're quite there yet. Thank you.
Almost. I'll look back to you in a minute, Paul. Councilmember McCullough, please.
I'm just going to follow up with a commendable effort this year. There's a lot that's covered that is going to make a big difference when you're going for the Pareto's Law. There's a lot of 80% good going on here, and 20% not being addressed, which we could do it all. I know I'm talking about our county delegate process. We feel like our projects came out about where they should, but we would like the process to examine between this year and next year how it is that small cities are at such a small number, because a number of us who feel like we're small cities, mine's at 20 and under, we are having a tough time competing with the larger cities, and I think it's time to look at that allocation. But again, I think there's very fair, equitable, and defensible allocation this year, and I'm really, really impressed with the process. Good work, all.
Thank you.
Mayor Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have the distinct honor to say thank you to Russ Blunt, who sits across here from Fife. As Public Works Director, emeritus forever, he cannot stop doing this. He runs our Transportation Coordinating Committee, which is the Public Works Directors. And all of us, I think, thank those folks who have done their work and put the applications together and what's going on and forward that. So to Russ Blunt for Pierce County, anyway, thank you very much for the effort.
Allow me to add my thanks to not only those technical folks, but to you on the phone, Councilmember Deb Nelson, who led the project selection task force process, and all of those of you around the table who participated in that. That's what got us to this action today. So maybe with that lead in, Councilmember Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move adoption of item 7, the recommended approval of projects for 2021-2022 federal highway dollars.
Seconded.
Seconded by Councilmembers Culler and Robertson. Thank you. Any further discussion? Oh, yes, please, Councilmember Mello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry I didn't get your attention before this. Real quick question, Kelly. Thanks for the amazing amount of work. If I'm reading the list correctly, one particular project I'm particularly interested in, because I represent Pierce Transit here, is the Bus Rapid Transit project. Part of it is funded on the funded list, and part of it's on the contingency list. Could you, and I think there's a few projects that are like that. They're on the funded list, and then part of the same project is on the contingency list. Can you shed some light on why that is?
Sure. That particular project, they are purchasing buses for that corridor, and the sponsor, when we were, again, because we have more requests than asked, the sponsor offered to basically fund a portion of the buses now, put a portion on the contingency list for the future. And where you see those mixes, the sponsors chose to either they can, for example, they can get funded for design and leave construction of the contingency list, or they were able to segment the project in some way to keep it moving and then wait in line for additional funding.
Thank you for explaining that.
Mayor Ralph?
Thank you. I'm a bit out of order. I realized we were questions before. Kelly, can you speak a little bit to the change in how CMAQ funds were applied this year? There was the change, I think the intention was to broaden it, but in the end it came down to only really major projects being funded. So some of the smaller projects, the non-motorized things, didn't fare as well.
That was not necessarily the focus of the change, and the change was applied in 2016. And at that time, without getting too weedy, we took the action in 2016 to do two things related to our CMAQ program. And for those of you new to that acronym, it's our Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Improvement Program. It's a very specific funding source from our highway dollars that has to demonstrate an air quality benefit. So as part of the last process, what we did is we decided there are still CMAQ dollars flowing to the countywide process, but a larger amount of the CMAQ dollars was placed in the regional competition, leaving the more flexible surface transportation program, the other funding source, moving that to the countywides because it is more flexible and more of those dollars could be spent there. The other thing that we did per federal legislation is we use a cost effectiveness factor. So the intent of the program is to funnel those CMAQ dollars to kind of the biggest bang for the buck air quality reduction, air quality emissions benefit. But there are still some small projects. The non-motorized projects don't have as large an emissions benefit because it's about getting people out of their vehicles. They are still eligible, and you will still see some of those projects. But I think seeing more of those dollars at the regional competition so they can go towards those larger projects, and then within the countywide groups, that's really up to the countywide groups to determine, how things are scoring. And I think it's a mix. Perhaps in the King County process, things were done a little differently, perhaps in trying to, the other nuance here is that this was the first process where we had to balance our highway dollars by year. It used to be kind of we award great projects, it's first come, first serve. This was the first year we had to balance by year. So I think that was another piece of that flavor, making sure we're meeting all our federal eligibilities, awarding the projects we want to award, but then doing that final adjustment.
And I know I'm speaking specifically for Kent, one of the things that we will look at doing differently is applying in multiple categories, and that was a new process. What we thought was truly a CMAQ project really may have fared better had we gone in a different category. Right. So learning curve with the changes in the process.
Okay, folks, it's been properly moved and seconded. We've had further discussion. Any other further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And thank you, Councilmember Nelson. Any opposed? Thank you very much, Kelly. We look forward to having this back in front of us again later on this year. So we have a couple of special guests here to talk to us a little bit about regional project funding and coordination. As they make their way up to the table, I'd offer we have 3 members of this body that serve as board members of the Transportation Improvement Board, including you, Dave, who sits as a designated representative here on the TIB, and I believe Councilmember Todd and Mayor Lucas are both TIB board members as well, though you don't necessarily wear that hat here. I'm certain you never take it off. Would any of you 3 like to offer any welcoming remarks?
Well, if I could, thank you for recognizing that there are representatives here. Association of Washington Cities was the approval authority for, in fact, Paul Roberts for me as AWC president, Mike Todd, and the 3rd mayor is Glenn Johnson from Pullman. There are 3 representatives from counties, and then there's public works directors, a great board. It is not anyone that will go into the weeds and talk about this project versus that project. It's a policy-type board. The staff is here today. They are very professional. They'll come out to your communities. There's probably 3 things that they do that I'm sure Ashley will talk about. One is there's 6 categories, about $92 million worth of type projects, maybe a little bit more than that. There's Relight Washington, so if you've gone to LED lights, that is a legislatively approved program. And the last one is Complete Streets, of which several of you may have been successful in that. And Ryan, I told Mayor Woodard yesterday you need to talk about that project today. So with that, Ashley Probart should not be new to those that have been in local government for a while, Association of Washington Cities and other things. But the most important person there, probably if you are in Snohomish, King, and Pierce County, is Greg Armstrong. He is one of the excellent engineers that are there, and he is the one that would work with information to your Public Works Director, to county, regional type groups, and we'll leave it at that. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Greg, welcome.
Well, thank you, Mayor Lucas, and good to see you, Councilmember Johnson. And I'd also want to recognize Paul Roberts. I believe, Paul, you were a TIB alumni as well. And behind me, we also have Dan Gatchett, the Freight Mobility Board Chair, and we also partner with the Freight Board on several projects as well. So with that, Mayor Lucas gave a little bit of a preamble, and what I thought I would do is I've got about 15, 20 slides to give a brief overview of what TIB is be a little more expansive on it, and then talk a little bit more about partnering and things we're seeing as trends in your backyard and what we're trying to do to both partner with PSRC and individual cities and urban counties for cost containment ideas as well as strategic thinking for project delivery. So with that, we do have our TIB mission and core values, and when I came on board about 1.5 years ago, I said our job's to fund good projects. So I'll kind of keep it that simple and move on from there. So over the past, since 1990, we've been keeping track. We've invested about $1.5 billion in the 4-county area, and that's the 4 counties, 43 large urban cities, 18 medium-sized cities. And the definition of a medium-sized city is one that's over 5,000 in population but has less than $2 billion in assessed value, and 21 small cities, and that means under 5,000. And to give you a sense of scale, that's about a little over half of the total TIB funds that we've invested statewide in the past since 1990. So where does our funding come from? We're a little unique in that we're state gas tax only for the most part, meaning that we do not have any federal regulatory actions as far as how we're managed and governed. It's strictly by state law. We do have a unique little quirk in that about 5 years ago when electric vehicle fees were coming along and you pay that $100 fee for the pleasure of having an electric vehicle not paying gas tax, once the state collects the first $1 million in gas tax, 15 cents on the next dollar goes to TIB and 15 cents goes to the county road board. And right now we've collected a whopping 300,000 a biennium, but the way electric vehicles are turning over or transitioning, we're anticipating that to be about 2 or 3 million in a couple of biennia from now. So it will be real funding for us. We also receive a little bit of Connecting Washington money, and I call this out, it's not codified, meaning it's not put into statute for permanent distribution, and that is something that we're pursuing, and Mayor Lucas mentioned the Complete Streets program, and so because it's not codified, that's possibly at risk. So moving along, and Kelly had already brought this up about where do you fit in the big scheme of things. We're 3 cents to the 49 cents, or about 6% of the statewide gas tax distribution, so that gives you a little bit of a sense of scale of our funds. And a rule of thumb is 1 penny is about $32 million a year annually in cash receipts. Also, to give you a little bit more sense of scale of where we fit into the overall statewide transportation budget, so for the 2-year budget, the supplemental is $9.1 billion. And if you look at us, under the other state transportation agencies, that's where we fit in $260 million out of about $9 billion in expenditures on a biennial basis. We do have project selections that happens annually, and last November we allocated $115 million, and I'll get into the programs in a minute. We selected 148 projects, but what I wanted to draw your attention to is some of the things you were just discussing with your own package is requested funding versus available funding. So we received $330 million in requested funds. We funded 115, but if you look at the urban arterial program, we have $77 million available last year. About 42-ish Greg, goes to your area, 44 goes to your area, and that's the most heavily leveraged program we have. It's about, as you can see, about a $3.50 to $4 requested in that category, and our anticipation is that it's going to go higher. The other thing I'd add on this before I move on is that Greg here and the rest of the staff, we're pretty aggressive at managing expectations in that we think your project's timely and good this year, so submit this one, don't submit all 5 on your list. So in many respects that understates the needs of local jurisdictions, but we're trying to tailor available funds to our program. So I'm always a little careful of this, especially with legislators. Having been around the block, they seem to have a temperature of when it becomes $7 or $8 in a request for available funding, they start to take note. So in some ways, by us managing our program so well, it's almost working against us in terms of seeking additional TIB funding. And that's just anecdotal, but it's anecdotal from 20 years of being on the Hill. So having said that, we're very good. Everybody in here that's a city or an urban county should be able to raise their hand and say they've received a TIB grant within the past 7 years. We're pretty good at allocating around the state. But more importantly, in the here and now, we're right in the middle of our call for projects. Our board adopted our program in May. Right now, till August 17th, cities and urban counties are busily working on their applications. Greg's been all over the 3-county area with field visits the past few weeks. They're due August 17th, and then internally we evaluate them and the board will select on November 16th. And I'm just going to touch on this really quickly. We're a little unique in that when our projects are submitted and they come in, we do an initial review, like a desk review. Then we go out and we physically look at every application that's come through. And then when we come back as a team, we review the applications for consistency. Hey, are you looking at this project the same way we are? And then we do what's called a jury process. So for example, the project that has the #1 mobility score in the region, do we all agree? And if the answer is yes, that comes off the top like a baseball draft. Okay, how much money's left? Then the second project, the third, until we're out of funds. And then there's a final recommendation, as Mayor Lucas said, at a program level, and that's what the board adopts. So moving ahead for this year, we're a little less than last year's proposal. We're at $107 million, $72 million in the urban arterial program. That's the largest. And the reason I'm calling this out is many of you here are urban, but I'll share with you, when I met with one of the transportation chairs last year, the response was, you guys do urban projects? I thought you were just the small city program. So I'm trying to make that a little bit more of a point of emphasis that we do a lot of work in urban areas as well. So speaking of the arterial programs, this is a little bit of a blended slide, meaning that for our urban arterial program, we focus on these 4 categories: safety, physical condition and mobility, and growth and development is unique, and that's where we're trying to time a new development, i.e. downtown Bothell, one of their projects, or out at Totem Lake, for example, that project, as that's coming online, that we're helping with the infrastructures in a timely fashion. The small city program is more focused on safety, physical condition, mobility, correct, Greg? On that. So for the urban arterial programs, Puget Sound, we're anticipating $39 million in awards for the 3-county region, and because of our statute and the way we're aligned, Kitsap County is in the southwest region, so there's some funding for Kitsap County through that mechanism. Small city, we're divided yet again a little differently, and it may not seem like a lot of money, but we find a way to make it go far and be pretty strategic with it. We also are pretty well known for our preservation programs. So I'm going to pause for a second. If you're not aware, for all cities under 5,000 in population, Greg and the rest of our team, we look at our streets and we look at their pavement condition, and that's about 1,500 miles of city streets under 1,500 or 5,000 in aggregate. And we try to pick off about 25% of that per year, and that's one of our baselines for determining the condition of the pavement and funding. So about 10 years ago when this started, this is what our pavement looked like in the small cities, and as you can see, we had a lot of them in poor condition. We've been incrementally inching up on that screen. Now we have fewer of them in the red zone, and frankly, some of those in the red zone will probably stay a while because it costs so much to invest in them rather than maintaining the rest of the streets that it's not always our best bang for our buck. We do have a sidewalk program, and when I came onto TIB a year and a half ago, I did not appreciate how wildly popular the need for sidewalk funding is, and unfortunately, it's a little bit of money, and it doesn't go nearly as far as all of us would like. But part of what we focus on with the sidewalk program is continuity, as well as making sure connections work in core areas and where there are pedestrian generators. Mayor Lucas had mentioned Complete Streets. It was originally created in 2011, but it wasn't funded until 2015 in the Connecting Washington package. And one of the key features of it is you must have a Complete Streets ordinance. We just started that call for projects right now. And what I wanted to call it real quickly here is you can see the before and after. Once there was funding attached to it around 2015, we're now up to about 90 jurisdictions that have adopted a Complete Street. And I would say that based on our information, it's us and Massachusetts are the two national leaders in Complete Streets advocacy and implementation. So I mentioned nominations are open, or the process began in July, and I'll get into that in a minute. But in March, we're anticipating a board award of between $7 and $21 million statewide, again, depending on our appropriation and applications. Where this is a little unique is that we evaluate the projects once they're nominated. And so these organizations have agreed to nominate jurisdictions that they feel are acting in the spirit of Complete Streets. And so if you get nominated, say, by Department of Transportation or FutureWise or Feet First, that nomination comes to us, we evaluate the project, and we look at their proposal, and then from there recommend an awarded amount. And the award levels range. This year, the board just adopted it from $100,000 to $1 million. Our first round, the first time we ever did this, was 100 to 500, or 125 to 500, right, Greg? And what we found is for some of the smallest of the small communities, spending $125,000 or $150,000 was a struggle. And then conversely, in our urban areas such as Seattle, going after a grant of, say, $250,000 and what that really gets you for a complete street improvement didn't necessarily pencil. And so the board acknowledged that. Now we're expanding the scale to upwards of $1 million for an award. The last thing I'll touch on a little bit, and then I want to get a little more focused, is Mayor Lucas had mentioned Relight Washington. This is for cities under 5,000 or jurisdictions with an assessed value of $2 billion or less. And this is converting streetlights to LEDs. And the idea is that if we can negotiate with the PUDs or PSC with a price point where you get a return after about 6 or 7 years, so with lights lasting 20 years, that's a huge savings. So City of Buckley, for example, I think it was like half of their gas tax budget was going to their streetlight program. And so we were helpful in underwriting that. That was the initial good news. Sadly, PSC raised all their maintenance rates, so they wound up just running in place when it was all said and done. Kelly had mentioned performance and things of that nature. If you ever have been on our website, we're huge on performance. We track almost everything, both our fund balances or our performance on project delivery or project timing. And along those lines, and I didn't know Councilmember Roberts was going to be here, but if you go on our website, for example, and touch the little dot for Rucker Avenue, it gives you the project information, the project history, its delivery, and all the notes on when it's to be funded, et cetera. And we do that for all of our projects, and it goes back well over a decade now. We also do an annual assessment, i.e. Projects completed, miles of roadway, miles of sidewalk added by way of example. So we're constantly monitoring our performance, one of which also is last time a jurisdiction's received an award. So that's kind of the TIB 101, but what I wanted to walk through next was some more of the discussion that we talked about on the phone a couple days ago of how do you partner with TIB and Puget Sound Regional Council to get your project to success. And over the years, and my predecessor, Steve Gorcester, and I, we put this together a couple of years ago. We were talking about it over lunch. All of you want to be in that quadrant of a high success, high dollar grant or award. And we all assume when we apply, we're going to get there. And this is just my scientific results here, so I'll take full ownership of it. This is what it looks like in real life, is that TIB, we're usually about $105 million a year. MPOs are back and forth. Impact fees are a lot of times low dollars, low success, unless you're the developer who's paying for them, and they will tell you it's high dollars and high success, but relative to infrastructure, not so much. But this kind of gives you a sense of, and then for example, Tiger Grants, when Tiger Grants were around nationally, that is a valid number, 6% success nationwide. So it really is how do you partner and diagnose which grant or loan or program is going to fit your jurisdiction to get a project delivered. And then that's juxtaposed against this chart that I've put together, that as I've seen over the years, if you're between $50,000 and $5 million, you can usually pull off a project on your own if you're a medium to large jurisdiction. But if you're a smaller one like Duval, for example, or a Buckley, or even a Tacoma, it will probably need partnership funding for $5 million projects. You usually need local funding, 1 to 3 partners, and there's usually private funding, and you can get it knocked out in 1 to 3 years. But the whole idea of this is just to show that as you increase in funding, the complexity and number of partners and time just gets longer and longer. And I added the one state budget on the right side a few years ago, and what we're seeing is, frankly, an alarming trend, and Greg and I talk about this all the time. It used to be we could partner or anticipate PSRC, us, and 1 or 2, and get you your $5 or $15 million projects, but because of cost creep and inflation, those same projects are like $25 or $30 million, and then suddenly, how do you get enough partners to get to yes on a project? And so that's the sort of things we talk about. And people always ask me about the cookie on the top of that. Sometimes I change that to a cherry. And the idea there is that if you don't have strong community support for the project, all the rest of that work is meaningless. And when I'm one-on-one with public works directors or city engineers or city managers, I say, your job is to concentrate on all the columns below and have your elected officials keep focusing on the cookie and validating that the work you're doing makes sense. Because some of these take 3 to 6 years, if you have council that changes over and has a change of direction, then you've put in a lot of staff time for a project that might not come to fruition. So moving on just a little bit, we talked about, this is our chart of partner funding by source, and this is just last year's award by way of example, and you can see how many partners participate in all of our TIB projects. So we put in about $115 million, but federal funds, these are the MPOs, meaning Puget Sound Regional Council funding, Yakima, and the others, they're basically in a second position. So it's 115 TIB. The MPO federal funding is second, and local agency funding is about third. So that just shows that's skewed towards small cities, but that just gives you a sense of scale of why partnership is so important, and then how do we strategically think about it. So since you live here, these aren't necessarily surprises to you, but the Puget Sound pressures, we hear about it every day, even down in Olympia. And the reason I put up the I-5 chart here, and this is a year old for data in terms of 65% of traffic delay, is the spillover effect in all of your communities trying to get off of I-5 and finding a backdoor way to get to throughout the region comes directly to our doorstep. TIB, can you help? And we hear this tradition, mostly, not so much, we always hear it from the urban cities, but it's the rural cities in transition. And, it's the Duvals of the world. We were in Ording just, 2 days ago, Greg, and they were sharing that in 10 years they're anticipating, 2 hours? How?
2 hours to get to Sumner.
2 hours to get to Sumner. And so just that regional network and what can we do about it is just staring all of us in the face. And then it's not just that, it's the bid climate. We had a city visit us a couple of months ago, and last year they were experiencing 1% per month inflation for construction costs. And so they came to us, what can we do? How can we manage it? And TIB, because we have some capacity to go above original bids, can we help out? Then we already know about competitive bidding, and then Kelly had mentioned what to do with the Connecting Washington projects. Some of those are now coming up short. And then there's also the component of the Gateway project and the expectation for locals to partner on components of that. And we're still a bit in the unknown territory of what Sound Transit 3 will mean in terms of impact on the bidding climate and availability of projects. So here's a couple of things that Greg and I wanted to chat about with you all, and Kelly, is cost containment options, strategic funding. When is it appropriate to federalize a project? And that's tricky when you have a small community or any community that says, gosh, if we can just get some PSRC design money, we're off and on our way. Well, then you've immediately federalized a project. And that might make sense, at least from our view, if it's a multi-million-dollar project. But we have an unnamed city in eastern Washington that got a $30,000 federal grant for an $80,000 project, and we estimated between all the staff oversight that we spent more money in staff oversight than we did on the actual award. So as a rule of thumb, we keep wanting to figure out how we can be proactive on those candidate projects that are over, say, $500,000 or $1 million that would perform well with PSRC, but maybe there's some opportunities where TIB is in first position on that, which would allow federal funding to go much further. A couple of other ones that are common sense, and since many of you are elected officials, I'll share this with you, that we get a lot of calls about this time of year. Hey, our mayor says he or she wants this project out to bid now because I made a commitment at my last election to get it in, and I am the bearer of bad news that I've been putting my foot down on those, saying that this is an awful time to go to bid, and what we've been experiencing is that if you bid in winter at this point, or you can bid now, you're going to be sadly surprised. But if you hold that, if you rebid in winter, at worst you're getting about the same bid you got last summer. I mentioned that 1% per month inflation. But we have been seeing about 5, 10, 15, 20% less.
It's about 20%.
Greg said 20% less by holding off till winter. And a lot of that has to do with some of the big paving companies that purchase ahead. They know their quantity prices in October. So that kind of set the table for the next year. Then the other one is having the courage to close down a street to traffic. We just find that to be tremendously cost saving. And then consider different materials. And I'll give this example. Linwood, bless their heart, they did all the right things. They went out into February, and they had an engineer's estimate of 10.7 million, and it came back at 16. So that resulted in some soul searching, and staff went back to council, and they made two proposals. One is to close the road, and the other is to change some of the materials that they were using. And if I remember, it's about a 1/3, 2/3 split in savings, the 1/3 or 1/4 being traffic control and the rest of the materials. But that basically got them back to close to the original engineer's estimate. And we're seeing this throughout the state when these have been coming in high to come back and rebid with traffic closure. So those are a couple of things that we've been seeing. So that's just kind of our quick overview. In deference to your time, we thought we'd just give the overview and maybe open it up to conversation, since you all have your favorite project and are thinking about how to fund it. The one thing I will say before we open it up, now, as Kelly talked about, Puget Sound Regional Council has really dialed in its funding structure, or its funding timing, and we're aware of that. And so in many cases, now that you're out 1, 2, or 3 years, that allows us certainty on who the partners are. But the other side of that is if you're out 2 or 3 years, we tend to live in the moment where we're trying to fund projects when they're truly ready. And to give you an example, if it's a construction-only project, we require that it goes under construction within 2.5 years from our November award date. If it's cradle to grave, it's 4.5 years. Isn't that right, Greg? Or 6 years?
Not quite.
Oh, well, he'll train me. He's new.
Okay.
But the point is, go ahead. But the point is that we try to make sure that our funding is not sitting around in a fund balance, because legislative staff loves to see fund balances and sweep it, and we try to avoid that. So Greg will straighten me out on the timing.
So construction only, we require those projects to be, construction only, we require those projects to be under construction in 1 year.
Oh, okay.
So not 2.5. And those that cannot meet that deadline then go to our delayed projects process, which has some, it basically takes it out to 2.5 years, but our requirement for them is that they go to construction in 1 year. And our expectation is they're going to start spending that money within that first year.
Okay, Ashley, you've done a good job when people are taking photos of your PowerPoint with their phone during the middle of the presentation.
PSRC has it, so it's available to everybody.
Yes, and it is also available online. I'm seeing a number of questions, and we'll start with you, Commissioner Calkins.
Thanks so much for the presentation. That was great. I'm curious, in terms of your revenue structure, what direction gas tax revenues are going, and is the increasing electric vehicle tax going to offset that?
Okay, so your question is, how are we holding up with gas tax receipts? Gas tax receipts for about the past 3 or 4 years have been stable at 1 penny equaling 32 million because of all those people moving into Puget Sound. It's been a bit of an offset. In addition, we've had some bond retirements, which has allowed us to run in place. But there's the revenue side and there's the cost side. So our revenue's been holding about stable, but the number of projects we're able to fund is, we're still awarding $4 or $5 million grants, but what that means for you all as partners is you might have a bigger gap or your projects aren't getting funded. So I want to be really careful in how I explain that. Then on the question of will the electric vehicle fee be an offset, we've run the numbers on that, and like I said, it'll be $1 or $2, $3 million in a couple of years. So it's, for us, it's a couple more projects, but it will not capture the loss in gas tax receipts.
Satisfied, Commissioner? I mean, obviously none of us are ever satisfied, but hopefully that was a satisfactory answer. Board Member Ramsey?
In a former life working for the city of Kirkland, we were big fans of the TIB, and now that I'm on the TIB board, I'm even a bigger fan of TIB, seeing how it works. The theme I'd like to emphasize is our opportunities to coordinate at an agency level, and I'm thinking, one, on the funding side, how do we better coordinate when we issue a request for a call for projects? As you see, there are multiple funding sources, and right now it's up to cities to kind of cobble that together, and creative staff and council members figure those things out. I would encourage us at the funding level to kind of figure that out as well. Project management, different agencies out there managing the same project in terms of funding. How can we better coordinate that or jointly manage it? And best practices. Ashley just ticked off a number of best practices. Are all the funding agencies adopting similar best practices? So once again, cities don't have to figure out the rules of one agency and cobble that against something else. So I would just encourage us to more and more, every opportunity we can, to better coordinate these funding sources around very complex projects. It just makes life with the cities that much easier and the projects that much better.
Yeah. Before the next person asks a question, I did want to touch on that a little bit. When I look at a city's transportation improvement program or plan or capital facilities plan, I'll happily tell you that TIB's funding has been spent multiple times over as the placeholder for how the project funding is going to come together. But having said that, as I shared before, we're really proactive and out in the field talking to jurisdictions about the likelihood of a project succeeding and how to coordinate. And like I said, now with Puget Sound adopting 1, 2, or 3 years ahead, the model's flipped a little bit where we have kind of provisional certainty that that's the funding, meaning unless the project falls apart for other reasons, what's likely to be funded by PSRC. And so with that, I'm going to turn over to Greg. Kelly flagged about a half a dozen projects right now that we're partnering with TIB, or PSRC, excuse me.
Well, some of these are existing projects and some of them are future projects that we're participating in. She gave us like 7 projects, Bothell, Everett Highway. That's one of those where they've received some money from PSRC, but they're not quite ready to come in for construction, so they will be coming to us in the future. We're already working with Edmonds on their 76 project. This looks like a future phase, so they may be requesting funding in the future. Snohomish County, we're right in the middle of building the Seattle Hill Road project and also 35th Phase 1. They have a project that's a higher priority this year. I've already met with them and talked to them about projects that they may be submitting for this year. This one looks like it's a couple years out. Sumner, we met with them last week about their 410 project. It's well positioned for an application this fall. 5 Port of Tacoma Road, we're in the first phase of that project. I think the second phase of that may be a year or 2 out for requesting money from us.
We're showing Russ the love, just so you know, on that. Yeah.
We are fully involved in the Linwood 196 project. We originally funded that, and they came back to you for some additional money when they found out they were going to come up short. And then we're in Phase 1 of the Montlake Terrace project. And we know they have a future phase, Phase 2, but that's not scheduled to go to construction until 2022. We would expect to see an application sometime in 2020 for that.
Excellent. Mayor Lucas, I had you next, and then we'll move to you, Councilman.
Thank you very much. I'm going to a question for Greg, and then one for Ashley, and then you decide which in order. Greg, probably many at the table have not dealt specifically with you or the other professional engineers that work for TIB. Could you take a minute to talk about your interaction with Public Works directors, advice, counsel? What do you do to help them with applications? And then Ashley, let me take Sound Transit. Our Chair Johnson, Claudia Balducci, and myself are on Sound Transit Board. And Paul Roberts, I apologize. He was hidden by Mike Quartz, that's what it was. So one of the things that I think that is there is your 1% a month makes some sense, but they are seeing huge increases in the electrical work because of the shortage of folks. And there could be 5, 10, 15, 20% increases on requests in the future. What do you see, or what have you seen with TIB? So Greg, I turn it to you first of all on the outreach to and what you would do for public works directors in cities and counties and so forth. Thanks.
So by the end of next week, I will have met with 85% of the public works directors for the agencies in King, Pierce, and Snohomish County. I have offered to meet with all of them. We meet and talk about strategy, talk about projects, what projects may be a good fit for TIB, and also what projects may not be the best fit for TIB. One of the reasons that Ashley talked about, we're getting we're funding $1 and $3. Why it's not 1 in 8 or 1 in 10 is we're really working with agencies to talk about projects and the appropriate timing when it may be the best opportunity to apply for TIB, not too early, not too late, and applying for the right project. So I've already been out. I've met with probably 60% of them, of the public works staff already. By the end of next week, it'll be about 85% in the Puget Sound, in the 3-county area.
So the cost containment question is a little tricky because our relationship is with the public owner, meaning an urban county or the city. We don't have the direct relationship, for example, with Sound Transit. So that's where what typically happens, and I'll speak to Russ, for example, when he sees trouble coming, for example, or things that are not in his ability to manage, we usually get calls early about, hey, what's your authority and can you help, bump up our ability to participate in the project. But the bigger thing that we really focus on is the partnering and trying to get ahead of it. And that's why, as Greg said, we try to time our funding when we have a lot of certainty with the project, so we know what the costs are and don't have the surprises. Where we do get caught, for example, is in the Kent Valley when it's the 1% per month sort of thing. That none of us saw that coming, and so now those sort of projects, what we're just seeing right now is they're slowing down, and we haven't seen exactly how the city in those cases is going to make up the difference. But what that tends to do, though, because we're a finite revenue, is if I give a cost increase for a jurisdiction, plus they're sitting on, say, 1, 2, or 3 projects because they've slowed down, chances are pretty low if you apply this year for a new project. We're going to ask you to hold until you can complete your current portfolio. But those cost things are really, really tricky, and the best thing we've seen is just early negotiation on that, so you can lock in and not drag it out. Where we've seen some of these drag out in the east side, meaning on the other side of the lake, as they've drug out for prolonged or protracted negotiations, that's where the costs just go crazy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Mello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being with us and everything you do to partner with our jurisdictions. My question is, we're all trying to do what we can to help streamline processes, and we all know that our staffs are, overly burdened, all the grants they need to write to put projects together and grant oversight and management. And we've had a very beginning conversation here a few months ago. I'm wondering from your perspective, has there been dialogue about the possibility and or usefulness of universal applications? So Public Works Director staff maybe fills out one application for 4, 5, 6, 7 different funding sources that are regional or statewide, and perhaps similar sort of universalness, whatever the word is, around grant management and oversight instead of doing the 7 different things slightly different.
So in response to your question, we talk about this all the time among the other funders because we're all work with each other to try to deliver projects, it's usually a quick phone call on various things. So I'm going to take a step back and just share that we're a staff of 9 people for delivering our programs. We're about 1 to 2% of our total budget is staff. The rest is all capital. So we're very capital intensive. And one of the ways we've tried to streamline these is through our dashboard and all these other management things. That makes our life easier, but it also helps our customers because they can see what we're up to. We are finally moving towards an electronic application. We're probably a year or 2 out on that. We have kind of a hybrid of an electronic application right now where a lot of data is input. I always think there's some value in kind of that common data point where you put in the city contact and all that, but once you get past that first screen, the programs are different enough and have enough of a different regulatory or oversight flavor. It's tough to make it a one-stop shop application is what we've learned. And I've been through many of these, many. And so where I see better help for most city staff and county staff is the timing of your application. Don't stack 3 applications for a small community where it's the city clerk who also has to pay the bills and have them all due at the same time. So for example, we had a request to change our process and we did a survey and it would benefit one of our 6 programs at the expense of the other 5 and some of the very people, some of your staff in the room said, whatever you do, don't change it because PSRC's is this time and they're attached to federal this and federal that. So I think it's more of the sensitivity of the state agencies and federal agencies synchronizing so your staff actually can come up for air to deliver or to even supply it. That's on the application side. I think once you get to the construction side, then it's more the timing of having funds available in such a manner where you know when you can go to design and when you can actually go out and bid your project.
Thank you. I hope that we continue that dialogue regionally. I think it's really, and I get that software systems are totally different and it's way easier said than done. I think it's a worthwhile conversation for the region to have over the long term about how to streamline these processes.
I'm not sure anybody has more experience in this process than our own Kelly McGurty. Anything that you'd like to add, Kelly?
I agree. I think, and I want to thank Ashley and Greg because I learned quite a bit today in terms of we don't get to this level of engineering degree and seeing some of the cost impacts in particular. We're excited to continue the conversation as well. I think one of the challenges we always face is our federal funds are so prescriptive and we've got so many requirements in terms of full funding and when we can do things and then our own regional policy. But just as the conversation was going, I think given our fiscal realities moving forward, given all the growth, I think now would be a great time before we launch into the next process, continuing to have those coordination conversations with TIB as well as our other partners. I don't know so much, I don't know how we would manage we might have more specific regional policy that isn't necessarily captured in all of the state processes, but yeah, I think we should start pulling something together and see where we can, to the extent possible, start to streamline and coordinate better.
And if I could add really quickly, part of why our Complete Streets program is on this schedule versus the rest of our grant application schedules, it's internal staff load management as well as the sensitivity to everybody else that has to apply for all these other grant programs.
Councilmember Crowler, you were next. Thanks for your opinion.
So I have 3 comments. One, nothing but praise for TIB and their processes and their sensitivity to smaller cities, staff's abilities to apply. 2, I felt like, you guys were almost mind reading. This was the genesis of a conversation which should happen at a different time with a smaller room and the key members of the MPOs and TIB and everyone sitting together and going, just where can we find efficiencies? And then do no harm is the bottom line rule. Right. The last thing is probably out of order, but you have no good of the order. Our headlines today about this weekend and I-5, I think we'd be remiss if we leave the room without commenting on our support for, I assume, WASDOT on the northbound lanes, et cetera, and our sensitivity to the public and what they're about to endure for the next 3 days on I-5 North. And I think Everett has a little thing going on, too.
I hope that's duly noted, John. Yeah, thank you. Mayor Ralph.
Thank you. So I just want to start with a thank you from the City of Kent. TIB has been an amazing partner with us, and we have had those challenges. You talked about it a little bit about the increase in costs on those projects. That that took us 10 years to cobble the money together. So then when those moving pieces start, it gets to be complicated. So I just want to say thank you so much for working with our staff on as those projects move forward. And I also want to put an exclamation point with just a really quick story on the cost containment. So we've got a very small project, $1.8 million, James Street, our main street going through Kent. Put it out for bid. Contractor came back. We awarded the bid. After the award happened, he came back and said, I'll save you $215,000 if you close the street down. And it was, I mean, and that's real money off the top of the project. So we held a quick community meeting, told the community, look, it's 20 days versus 60 days, savings of $215 million. Only time in my career in government I've gotten a unanimous response from a room of community members. They all said absolutely, and we're going ahead with the closure and saving $215 million. So definite, great strategy.
Mayor Erickson.
You said you're going out to bid in the winter. We're doing a TIB project. We're going to bid in September. Should we push it back? I mean, should we go to November? I mean, what are we talking about here? What's winter?
Winter's coming.
My recommendation would be wait till November. Bid it. The prices, we generally see, it's very cyclic on bid prices generally, and depending on what items you have, I think that's basically a paving project. If it's paving, they're not going to, unfortunately, they're not doing paving until next spring. So November, December, January, anything before about the end of March, bid at any time in that window. But in September, everybody's still, contractors, their plate's full. They got a lot of stuff going on, and we're seeing 15 to 20% higher prices just in this time of year. So I would push it to November if that was reasonable.
I think what you're hearing is TIB is available for free advice, folks. Pick up the phone, give them a call. Ashley, my question, and then I don't think that there's anybody else, is just a little bit about complete streets. You saw in that graph the big jump to almost 90 jurisdictions. Right. I wonder if TIB gives technical advice to those jurisdictions about the adoption of complete streets ordinances. I imagine that all of us around the table have adopted them, but I would also imagine that would, you would see 80 different complete street ordinances with maybe some similarities, but also a lot of differences. Does TIB offer sort of a model ordinance, and then everybody does a little flavor?
So I'll answer that. Basically, once a few of them got out there, a lot of them are reproduced or borrowed. You know, it's not plagiarism; it's an homage when you do that. But having said that, by state law, it requires the ordinance. That's not our requirement. Now, when you color in the lines of what that ordinance means, it ought to be. We do advise caution and not just copycat from one jurisdiction to the other. It really needs to be tailored for your community on what your definition of a complete street community looks like. But once you do have your ordinance, and we do look at that as part of what's your work plan and how are you fulfilling your objectives in your ordinance. So so that's where I would recommend going to Municipal Research Services Center. We cross-link that on our own site, and we do talk about things that are, anticipated or gives you more strength in terms of winning friends with the nominators on that point. But I did want to have a couple of clarifying things. The way our program is structured, if you received a grant 2 years ago and you're not complete with that before we close our process, you're not eligible. So what this chart shows here is you have 71% in red not eligible because they don't have an ordinance. And then of the remaining 29%, 11% of them have active awards. And so a lot of them are under the gun right now to try to finish by July, August, or they're going to have to sit out a cycle. In the meantime, we put this pie chart together about 3 weeks ago, and we've already had two or three close, and we've had about 4 or 5 new cities adopt ordinances. So it's a little bit of a moving target. So for you all at the council level, when you're thinking strategically, what we are encouraging, given the size of the grants, yes, you can attach it onto a multi-million-dollar project and finish that complete street, but just be aware that that might take 2 or 3, 4 years to deliver the project, and you would be taking yourself out of a future grant cycle. So we look at these as improvements that create community connectors. And I just presented before the Joint Transportation Committee 2 weeks ago And I actually did not show the photos of some of the ones that were complete. I just said they're not sexy. Because when you see a multi-use path and now it has lights, it doesn't look very sexy. It's just the lights to make it more of a complete street. But those are the very things that your communities need most, is those sort of little connectors on that. So that's, in the free advice giving, that's one thing we are strongly recommending, is that yes, we've set it up as 3 years to deliver, but strategically you're better off picking something that you can deliver in 1 or 2 years. And being a local government person, it's also nice to take credit for something that gets done in a year or two and encourages going back out and enhancing the program.
Mr. Calkins?
Quick follow-up for Greg on the capital projects bidding cycle question. Is it that you want to put it out to bid in the winter, or you want the work to be done in the winter? So depending on the cycle, I can imagine us needing to go out to bid in August. We want the work done in the winter versus November. So what's better?
Well, the whole thing is to bid it in the winter for the work to begin in the spring, so that you can complete the work by the fall of the following year. So bidding in the winter is just, or trying to construct in the winter, unless you're doing something that's primarily just concrete work for sidewalk, is very difficult. I mean, our environment, they actually shut the paving window down about mid-October per the spec book. So we don't want to be paving between the middle of October and the middle of April. So this would be for construction the following season.
Greg, Ashley, thanks for making the trek up from Olympia. We're grateful to you for your presence and for the good work. That is the final item. Is there anything anybody else would like to add for the good of the order? Councilmember Culler. Well, congratulations all. You get to take the month of August off. We will be back here for our regularly scheduled meeting September the 13th. We're adjourned.